Alright, so this is the retake practice work for the Module 1, Lesson 1 through 6 quiz. So put your name and period in the corner, please. Alright, so A says 45 times 10. So if I have a whole number, then I can just add a 0 to my answer if I do times 10. So 45 times 10, 450. Dividing by 100. Well, if this was 9,700 divided by 10, when these numbers shift to the right, I'm going to lose that 0 right there because it's going to shift over here onto the other side of the decimal. So when everything shifts over divide by 10, I would get 970 as my answer. So if you divide by 10, you lose 1 0. So what happens if you divide by 100? Both of those zeros would shift to the right of the decimal, and you would end up with 97 point, which is just 97. So when you divide a whole number by 10, you lose 1 0, and if you divide by 100, you lose 2. To check back your thinking, 97 times 100 is 9,700. And I know I can check my division by multiplying the answer times the divisor to see if I get the dividend, which is what I started with. 97 times 100 is 9,700. 9,700 divided by 100 is 97. Remember, we're thinking, how many hundreds are in 9,700? Well, there'd be 97. Alright, so let's look at C. So we are going to do this one on the place value chart. I forgot to change this from the real test, so that should be an 8. Alright, so 8 ones and 67 hundredths. 8 and 67 hundredths times 1,000. So before we make a chart, let's just think about this. If you had 8 times 1,000, that 8 is in the ones. Well, 8 times 1,000 should be 8,000. So when you're done, if your 8 is not in the thousands place, then you know you made a mistake somewhere. Alright, here we go. So we need a place value chart. And we're going to put 8.67 on it, and then we're going to shift 3 to the left. So we should put it somewhere over here so we can shift 3 to the left. Okay, let's label the places so we can think about our number. I have 8 ones, 600 or 6/10ths, and 7/100ths. Alright, times 1,000, every 0 you have is how many times you shift. Times 10, times 100, times 1,000. And let's see where the 8 ended up. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. 8 times 1,000 is 8,000. The 6 shifts 3 times. 7 shifts 3 times. And then the decimal needs to go straight down, and you end up with a 0 in the ones. Sorry, it's all slanted. 8,670. And then see if it makes sense. Your 8 ended up in the thousands. 8 times 1,000 should be 8,000. Alright. So let's just read this number out loud. 268 and 7/10. That means that you have 268 ones, or wholes. So it's like you have 268 trays of brownies, and then you have one more tray of brownie that only has 7/10 of the tray. Like 7 out of 10. So let's write this number as a fraction too to think about it. 268 and 7/10. All right, so let's make a place value chart, and we're going to divide by 100, so we need to shift our digits 2 to the right for them to get smaller, which means we should probably put our number on the left so we have room to shift. So 268.7. Let's label our places. The 2 is in the hundreds. Ones, tens, hundreds. 7/10. All right, divide by 100. So shift everything 2 to the right. The 7 ends up in the thousandths. The 8 ends up in the hundredths. And the, whoops, that's a 6. The 6 ends up in the tenths. The 2 ends up in the ones. What am I forgetting? If I just rewrite this up here, it's going to look like it's 2,687. But I can't divide by 100 and get a bigger answer than I started with. So it can't be 2,687. Bring your decimal point straight down. You should have 2 ones and 687 thousandths. So I didn't leave myself much room up here, but it should be 2 and 687 thousandths. Think if it makes sense. I started off with 2 in the hundreds. I ended up with 2 ones. 200 divided by 100. What's 200 divided by 100? Well, 100 goes into 200 2 times. So 200 divided by 100 equals 2, which means my answer makes sense because the hundreds shifted twice to the right into the ones. 200 divided by 100 is 2. All right. For E, 10 squared is 10 times 10. And 10 times is 100. Not 20. 10 times 10 is 100. All right. So let's look at G. We need to do 78 and 57 hundredths times 100. So why don't you try to set that one up for yourself and then check back with me. All right, that's what I have so far. You have to make sure that you get the number in the right place to start with, or else if you shift it, it won't work out right if you don't start it in the right place. So I had 7 tens and 8 ones. 7 tens, 8 ones, then the decimal point. Okay, we're doing times 100, so we're going to shift 2 to the left. Decimal point goes straight down. What's that 7 worth? Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. So that's the number 7,857. All right, let's think about if it makes sense. Find the ones. We started with 8 ones. and we had to do times 100. 8 times 100 is 800, right? So if I do 8 times 100, where did the 8 end up? In the hundreds. So always check with your ones. The 7's on the left in the thousands. All right, next page. Okay, so we're going to write this number in unit form. So first let's label our places. Ones, tenthesses, and hundredthesses. Okay, now unit form looks like this. It has the number and then the place. Number, place. So 2 ones, 5 tenths, 8 hundredths. So go ahead and write that out down here and then check back with me. Okay, make sure you put the THS's. They are not whole numbers. They are tenthesses and hundredthesses. So if we wrote that as a fraction, it would look like this. 2 and 58 out of 100. So there's 2 wholes. And then 5 tenths and 8 hundredths is 58 hundredths. All right, this is called unit form, but that's not how we say it when we read it. So this one, they want it in word form. And word form is how we say it. So repeat after me. 8 and 207 thousandths. So the only place you hear is the place it lands in. So let's write that down here. 8 and 207 thousandths, all in words. So pause the video and check back. 8 and 207 thousandths, THS's. All right, so read G and box the question, circle the numbers, underline important information. All right, so first we're going to put this number 7 and 58 hundredths on a place value chart in decimal form. Then we're going to use that to help us with this problem. It says we can draw base 10 blocks or discs to help us understand better. So first, why don't we write this as a fraction? 7 and 58 hundredths. Okay, so what would that look like as a decimal? Seven and 58 hundredths. Okay, let's put it on a place value chart. We have 7 in the ones, 5 tenths, and 8 hundredths. All right, expanded form. Okay, expanded form just shows the value of your numbers. So if this was like 836 in whole numbers, it would be 800 plus 30 plus 6. But these are not whole numbers, so we need to put the value of these numbers. But when we add up expanded form, it should equal your original number. So whatever we put down here should equal 7 ones, 5 tenths, and 8 hundredths. All right, here we go. Basic expanded form. I have 7 ones. There's a 5 in the tenths. So how do you write 5 tenths as a decimal? And 8 hundredths. And that's all you got to do for basic expanded form. Okay, to do the more complicated one, let's add some discs or base 10 blocks right in here. So I have 7 ones, 5 tenths, and 8 hundredths. And I need to go to video 2 because I am running out of time, but let's put the value in at least one of each of these discs. So each of these is worth 0.1, and each of these is worth 0.01. Sorry, that's too hard to see. So I put it up there. All right, next video.